Hey guys, hope everybody had some great holidays and time with family and so forth. As the new year kicks off here, I wanted to go over our why behind what we're doing a little bit more at Code 3 Assets. So I know we did another video to kind of explain it, but I wanted to go a little deeper on the why component of it because I think it's pretty important. So let me share a screen here. Code 3 Assets, our mission statements listed at the bottom there, but the most important part, the part that's really founded in why, is the beginning, the protecting generational freedom. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, why that seems to be, there's probabilities that say that could be at risk. I mean, obviously nobody knows what's going to happen, but in the background I come from, if you can, we always say predictable is preventable. So just a little bit of awareness and so forth can go quite a ways in how you position yourself, your portfolio, your family, and ultimately society. So, um, excuse me. Mission statement. Always start with a mission statement in our operational briefing here, and tactics, techniques, and procedures. Now, if you have no idea what we're talking about with that, then you really should send an email to SWAT at code3assets.com. What that'll do is we'll send you out a free series of reports. I think there's 3 reports in there, and it just kind of talks about kind of what's been influential in my life. One of the things, anyway, which has been tactical training and SWAT training and so forth, and how we apply many principles of that in our everyday lives, business lives, investing lives. So if you're not sure what this has to do with investing, again, just send an email to SWAT at code3assets.com and the team will send you those reports. So that way you'll be kind of up to speed and can see the parallels here. So tactics, techniques, and procedures. Obviously, the tactic is real assets. You guys know that if you've watched any of our stuff before. And then the technique is we do that collectively through community, through sharing information, through syndicating assets where groups of people come together. We decentralize assets. And then procedure is something that enhances the technique. So this is kind of how the tactical community trains and thinks. So today we're going to be focused on the procedure. That's the goal of this particular recording. Everything we're doing at Code 3, the ultimate why is about preserving freedom. So anytime we're doing something, there's a what, a how, and a why. And it's pretty easy to get stuck in the everybody wants to know what we're doing, or what someone is doing, not necessarily us, but it's always easy to go to the what and then how they're doing it. So if I build houses, what kind of houses do you build? How do you build them? Nobody really gets into the why. And I think that's really the most important part of getting people motivated to take action. So that's where we're going to focus today. So a little bit of history, if you think about world history simplified, most of world history is revolved around few people controlling the wealth, the property rights, et cetera, and the masses servant to them. So whether you're talking kings, queens, dictators, whatever, that's been most of world history. Then the United States come along and kind of flipped it on its head. And what they did, or what we did, I should say, is we said, okay, the wealth, the property rights, the power, the control rest with the people, and the elected officials, the politicians, or the central planners is what I call them. But they are servant to the people. Well, I think we're starting to see that slowly transition over time. I think it's slowly been transitioning, and certainly the last 2 years have indicated some fairly rapid transformation that's a little bit more parallel to what has traditionally been world history. But this has been going on for decades. I think we're just seeing it accelerate. And so a lot of politicians, we as human beings, it doesn't matter whether you're a politician or just somebody, we are all self-interested people. We do something for self-interest. So even if you were the most maybe selfless person by volunteering all of your time at an orphanage or a church or whatever, well, you're still somewhat selfish because you're doing it because it makes you feel good. It helps society and all of that. Well, there's still a self-interest in it, and the fact that it makes you feel good. So anything people do, there's something in it for them to some degree, or they wouldn't be doing it. And politicians are no different. When you put a politician into Washington or local or wherever, but in Washington, they make less than $200,000 a year, and then over their career, they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, why do you suppose they want to be there? Okay, so they're going to do things to serve their interests. And I think it's not really about service anymore. It's more about the self-interest. And anymore, we're seeing a system where people, they just fight tooth and nail, and it's all about winning. It's not really about the good of the whole. So they create systems, they create distortions. Now, whether they do that intentionally so they can create this problem for us where it preserves our power, I don't know. Or maybe it's a result of, maybe they're just ignorant to that, and it's a result of what they're doing. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The result is what it is, whether it's orchestrated from the onset or whether it's just the benefit to them of them making other decisions, and these are unintended consequences. I don't know, but the end result is the end result, and that's what we need to be paying attention to. So no secret, there's a ton of division in the country. I would say that our society is alarmingly divided, certainly more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, probably more than what we've seen in anyone's lifetime that's alive today. And the media is fanning those flames. Why? Because it's profitable. People will tune in. They pick sides. It's 24/7 competitive news cycle, and that division's not going to stop. So, they create a lot of confusion. They use words that people don't know what they mean, including us sometimes. You got to be plugged in, kind of watch fairly closely to not just drown in it or just kind of quit paying attention. And that's really to their benefit, not ours. So I'm going to oversimplify this, but I want to illustrate how economics affects freedom, because that is the why. Okay. So there's three buckets that the federal government essentially spends money in. And I know we could get down into the weeds of what they spend at the granular level, but to just put it in three basic categories to keep it simple, again, so we're not using all this confusion that we see in mainstream media. Well, the government services debt. They go borrow money, they issue treasuries, so forth, and they service the debt, the interest expense on that. They are not going to default on the debt on purpose. Now, I don't know what that may look like in the future, and when other powers or other forces at play come to bear, and how that may affect things, but they're not going to elect to default. So I don't see that spending being cut. Defense spending, we could argue this, but certainly there's a lot of posturing with major countries in the world right now, and maybe you could argue we're entering cold wars with China and or Russia, whatever you'd want to argue, but they're rolling out new weapon systems and flexing their might and posturing, and we're no doubt doing the same. So I don't see any huge cuts. I don't think anybody would probably see any huge defense spending cuts. And I'm not talking a little bit year over year. I'm talking dramatic cuts, and I'll illustrate why here in a moment. I don't see that coming. Then there's social spending, and social spending could be actual welfare programs, or maybe, that's the infrastructure programs, or that's, energy investment, or whatever it is. I'm just saying everything that's spent into the society, because trying to keep this simple, well, I don't see that slowing. I can't imagine anybody watching this video sees social spending slowing. Welfare programs are going to increase. When you look at take away the politics and you just look at the technology, artificial intelligence, automation, that is going to eliminate jobs over time. Driverless cars, that may sound great until it starts to affect truck drivers and pizza delivery drivers and so forth. People, fast food restaurants and cooks and these types of things, and people that used to take your order at these restaurants, those are all jobs, and they're going away. And that's going to continue to accelerate. You have to ask, where are those people going to go? They're going to go, a lot of them, to social programs. So those programs are going to grow. I think it's probable. There's no certainties, as our good friend George Gammond would say. And if you're not following him, you should be. But there are no certainties. There's only probabilities, and there are no solutions. There's only trade-offs. Well, if you look at that, I think for a number of reasons that this will help push the central bank digital currency, and we're not going to get into the weeds on that today, but that ultimately is going to have a lot to do with the why. Maybe we'll do another video on that and kind of talk about how that ties directly into why we're doing what we're doing. But at the end of the day, they're going to create more funding to pay for all this stuff that's going to grow in size. And I call it thin air money. The economy didn't really grow. That's not why, that's not where the money came from. They just willed it into existence, if you will. And that has consequences. So if you look at debt to GDP, and I just pulled this off the internet, I suppose we could find varying numbers, but that's pretty close. Approximately in 2020, we're 129%. You know, we after World War II, we were over 100% a couple times, but there's a whole bunch of things behind that. If you look at here, we are clearly, let's just simplify this. If you had in 2020, if your family, your maximum output of product, goods and services that you could bring into your household was $100 a month, this would mean you had $129 a month in expenses. Well, people say, well, how's that going to go on? Well, it could go on forever. You know, the modern monetary theory is what they call it. It could go on forever as long as there's debt. As long as somebody will keep lending you money to service that, it could go on for generations. But there are cause and effect consequences with it. That's the part people aren't talking about near as much in the mainstream medias and so forth. But I want you to particularly draw, without getting into the weeds on here, I'm not trying to drown you with facts and figures. Look at how it shrunk. Okay, we're down a little bit to 2021. Ask yourself, do you feel like the economy produced more goods and services? Because that's where our gross domestic product should come from, our production of stuff, and services. Do you think that we produced more or less? I mean, we can't even get things. It's months to get basic components that used to take days or weeks. So real economic growth isn't what drove this. It's inflation. So if you have that $100 in maximum potential income in your house, but you have $129 or $122 a month in obligations, well, you can lower your obligations. But we just talked a moment ago in the three spending buckets, there's no indication they are going to lower that. So what is the other option to close that gap? It's to grow the economic portion. Well, if people are leaving the workforce and we're producing less stuff, can we grow that organically and grow our GDP in a responsible, stabilized fashion? Well, that's not really. So what they can do is they can inflate it. And this is why the Fed talks about, one of the reasons they talk about having a target inflation rate of 2%. So they want the system to inflate. So for example, let's just pretend, really simplify it, that our GDP produced John Deere tractors and that's all we made. Well, let's say they cost $1 a piece and we could produce 100 tractors a year. Well, that is $100 a year in John Deere tractors. Our GDP is $100. If I don't know, we could come up with a reason. Maybe it's we have to have better emission systems on the tractors, or we come up with a regulation and we make people to start manufacturing them in a way that costs more money. Now we could sell 100 John Deere tractors at $1.10. Well, now our GDP is $110. See, we actually shrunk the gap between the debt and the GDP by inflating, but we still only have 100 John Deere tractors. There's not more stuff in the real economy. There's not more tractors plowing more fields. We're not producing more wheat. We're not employing more farmers. We have 100 tractors. That didn't change. Well, what that does is it shrinks our purchasing power. That's how inflation steals from you, or that's not really how inflation steals from you, but that's why they want inflation, so that they can continue to spend. All right. Well, the inverse of that is they don't want deflation. They're terrified of deflation. The central planners cannot have deflation because the gap will grow. Okay. Now it'd be good for consumer prices. It'd be good for us all to be able to afford more housing, but they don't want deflation because that doesn't work for them then, you see. So you got to be aware of that really is overly simplified, but it's true. And the system destroys wage earners and savers. So what are the results of that? First, not enough people fully understand it. This isn't being taught in schools. All you're taught is to get a job, work hard, invest in the stock market, put money in a 401k, save. Well, you can't outpace this. You can't save fast enough. Ask yourself, if you would have decided not to buy a new pickup in 2004 when it cost $40,000 in cash, you say, well, I'm just going to save up till I have the $40,000, but it takes you 15 years to do it. Well, all of a sudden that pickup costs $80,000. You still that you're poorer. You still don't have the pickup. Okay, so it's very hard to pace this system and save enough. So what's going to happen is more and more people are going to reach the end of their lives and they're into their productive life, excuse me, where they can't really produce to the GDP anymore. They can't really go out and produce goods and services because we're all going to be affected by age and illness and health and so forth. So it's going to create more government dependency. Well, then we're going to grow the social spending. We're going to have to create more money to pay for it. And you see, then we're going to have to somehow close that gap. That means we either have to trade off something else, defense spending, debt service, or we got to inflate the problem away. So it's going to continue to expand the problem. And the issue with that is if we start to put all of society into a situation where they rely on central planners or politicians or the few that, again, have self-interests, is that good for us? You see, if we start to rely on them for our necessary basic needs, housing, food, stimmy payments, stimulus checks, whatever the case may be, that's not necessarily a good thing. That's how it risks freedom. Because suddenly, if you need them, it's not necessarily about what you want. It's about what they want now. They who control the gold make the rules. So they can start to put pressures on you. And we've seen that. If you look at the last couple of years, I think about back in the 90s, if you were a nurse and you were told, boy, that's a good, safe, secure job, well, it probably would have agreed with you. Well, now, if you don't want to do certain things in your life that the government wants you to do, and I'm not trying to politicize this, I don't care what your position is on the illness out there right now. That's not the point. It could be any number of things in the future. See, this could be a slippery slope from a macro perspective. And if you're a nurse and you don't want to do what the government wants you to do right now, you got a tough choice. You can either abandon what you've put together your whole life, so suddenly that's not so safe and secure, or you can comply. Well, maybe later they can put the squeeze on people if, I don't know, they don't want to convert to electric vehicles, or they're not backing the climate initiative, or whatever the case may be. And by the way, go do a little bit of looking. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there is talk out there about how emissions and how much better it was for the planet. Some people talk about that in the mainstream when these lockdowns occurred, and maybe we should have some lockdowns sporadically just for that purpose. You see, there's cause and effect relationships. It's the foot in the door theory that once this stuff starts to happen, where does it stop? And that's the reason why we are doing what we were doing. And we're not going to get into the how or the what. It's tempting for me right now. I just want to spit out how we do this. And that's where I really get motivated by it. But that's not the point of this video. So understand that economics are free. It is freedom. I mean, they're the Federal Reserve's being politicized when it's supposed to be independent. And that's going to continue to grow. So just be aware of that. And we already talked about the jobs. So if you value freedom, you should focus on your personal wealth, because if you have personal decentralized wealth and you control real things that real people need, you are in a position of advantage. But if you are centralized, if all of your wealth is tied up in the stock market and they control policies that affect the stock market, or they control through special interests the major players in the stock market, see, they can start to affect few things that control mass numbers of people. That is not decentralized. Now, I'm not saying don't invest in the stock market. I'm just saying understand the trade-off and the exposures you have. No different than a job that they're now putting the squeeze on people, or whatever the case may be. I just want you to understand that if you have wealth, not only do you have freedom of your time to go do things you want to do, but you preserve generational freedom for you and your family, because you're not going to be subject to the potential control or squeezes central planners can put on you now and in the future if you don't get behind whatever their agendas are. So we're just about done here. Really it boils down to this. There's people that have done a whole lot harder things than what we're proposing people should do. We're actually proposing that you should go out and grow your own wealth. Well, there's some benefits to that, even if we're wrong about all of this. So we're not saying that the sacrifice we're making or we're asking people to make, it's not really a sacrifice, because it's going to benefit your own life. So certainly we're not comparing it to generations of past that have had serious sacrifice and have fought really hard for what we have. But I think we owe it to them to stand up and do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. So, anybody that knows my background, I've stood for something bigger than myself my entire adult life. through my military service, law enforcement service, so forth. But I've always been, I guess, I guess I'm fortunate, not that it was handed to me, but I'm glad that I went out and got involved in business and understood economics and got around other people so that I could see this and try to help other people understand where this is going and what they can do to kind of hedge their own risks. So the question is, do you have a code 3 why? Remember, code 3 stands for a rapid response or an immediate response to a rapidly evolving situation. Well, that's exactly what we're facing. So what we're asking for, do you feel the code 3 why? And if you do, then you should take some action for yourself, your family, and future generations. I mean, if we all come together and do a little bit, we can move a lot. So here's some things you can do. You join our community, send an email to community@code3assets.com. What that's going to do is that's going to get you on our mailing list. I mean, we're not going to sell you anything. That's the worst thing that happens. If you choose to do business with us in the future, great. If you want to do it on your own, great. If you want to do it with other people, great. The point is just do it for the benefit of everyone. You know, we're going to distribute information that's educational, videos like this. We'll get into the weeds on some things. Maybe you'll learn about opportunities in the future, depending on what we're doing and how we're doing it. But the point is just do something. And if the biggest thing you're going to lose is getting a few emails in your inbox and expanding your network and your knowledge, well, I don't see how that's a loss. That's a pretty good trade. And if you're, again, if you want the series of reports we did where we're tying back kind of the culture to the tactical training and SWAT trainings that I've been through over the years, that's all team based. It's all looking out for one another, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And if you want to kind of get a feel for that culture and how it ties to investing, just send an email to SWAT@code3assets.com and we'll send you that for free. So I appreciate everybody watching. Everybody, I hope you had great holidays. Thank you. And we'll see you on the next one.